Welcome to Animation for the Web, Giving Life to Your SVGs. Today we'll be talking about web animation and we'll be focusing on SVG animation. And I am your host, Mandy Cox. So this is a little bit about me. I've been a web developer at CBS Interactive, which is a subset of Viacom CBS, which once was CBS Network. I've been there for about 4 years now, and when I'm not there, I am a volunteer at Innocent Lives Foundation, which is a nonprofit that uses open source intelligence to unmask child predators on the internet. So very different things, both are a lot of fun, which is probably weird to say, but it is. So there are my probably most active social media handles if you ever want to get a hold of me or check out what I'm up to. Quick shout out to our Code PaLOusa sponsors. Whoop, whoop. All right, so let's get started. Let's talk about web animation as a whole. So these are some things that I've plucked out as just general rules of web animation. So you want to focus on speed. If it's too fast, it's alarming, it's jarring. You don't want to spook your users, you know? If it's too slow, it's boring. So you don't want to just be sitting there waiting for an animation to finish. You also don't want to overuse animation. If everything's animated, nothing's animated. You don't want your users just sitting around waiting for something to finish animating, especially if everything is animated. So you want your animations to feel special. You want things to feel natural and natural movements on your pages. You also want to have animations while you have a loading, while something's loading. If something's going to take a while to load, you want to have some sort of movement on the page to distract the user. Users are not very patient. So if something's going to take a while, you want to be like, look, something shiny. So you want to have them something to look at. So that's a good time to use animation, especially SVG animation, which is something we're going to be focused on today. You can also use animation to add a little bit of flavor, add a little bit of character to your site. So you can like legitimately add characters. So if you have a mascot or something for your brand, then you can animate the character, animate your logo. And this is more for SVG animations as well. But sometimes these can be distracting, especially if you overuse them. So that goes back to rule number 2. So just use with caution, just kind of be aware of what you're doing. A good example of this is Cassie Codes. I will show you her website because she is just phenomenal. So you can see her logo has a nice animation to it, and then we'll reload again, and then she has a flickering here. So it's nothing that draws attention away from the content. So you can still see the focus is, hi, I'm Cassie. I like making fun interactive things with code. I also talk and write about those things. So you can scroll further down on her site. She has a little bit of an animation on hover and stuff like that. But the main focus is still where it needs to be. So her site is one of the best examples of when to use animation. She also has this cute little toggle that she made where it goes from dark mode to light mode. And all of these things are on her CodePen. So I do follow her on CodePen because she just, if something new comes out regarding any sort of animation, anything, she's probably one of the first people to make something with it. So she's one of the best people to follow regarding that. So she's a lot of fun. So now common types of web animation. We've got user interface animation, so like easing in and out of panels. So when you open up a menu or something, and then that'll kind of ease in or ease out. That's probably the most common type of animation, or like hovering on buttons and stuff like that. You don't want to just like flash in a hover animation, you know what I mean? So those are probably the most common types, but today what we'll be focusing on is SVG animation because it's fun. So you've got 2 different subclasses of SVG animation. You got the CSS only, and the pros to that is that it's good on performance. It doesn't add any of the bulk of a JavaScript library to your site. So those are both good things. And then the other one is a JavaScript animation library. Some of the popular ones are Three.js, Anime.js, and GreenSock.js or GSAP. today I will be showing you GreenSock or GSAP, and it's demo time already. So let's get to it. The first one I'll be showing you is a CSS Only Animation. So if you didn't have time to see this, I will drop it in chat as well. There you go. So this one is going to be CSS only. And as you can see here is the SVG. And if you're not familiar with SVGs as a whole, I suggest that you spend some time reading up on those. You can still animate them if you don't know a ton about them, but it's a lot easier once you've read up on how they work and how to group them and like what does the line mean, or you can get down to how exactly does the path work. You're not going to be writing SVGs from scratch normally. Usually, so what I'll do is I'll go and I usually make my own in Illustrator or something along those lines, and then I'll export it because then I know which groups are which that way and how they're laid over each other. But I mean, for this one, I just got it from, what was that, illustrations.co, I think. Nope, that's what I get for typing blind. Never do that. Wow, so close. Too many L's. Oh, there's 3 L's. See, so this person just gives you a bunch of vectors and SVGs and PNGs of things because they got bored. So for all the demos today, I used images from this site just because they're cute and fun. And it was easy for me, so I didn't have to make any. But usually I make my own. But I did have to pull them out and do a little bit of tweaking in Illustrator just because they weren't layered the way that I wanted. But let's go over the way that I want to animate it. So what I want is, I want to make it look like this van is going on an adventure. So I want it to kind of bounce up and down. I want it to make it look like it's moving, but I don't want just the van to be moving on the page. I want to make it look like the van is the center of attention, and then the background will be moving accordingly. And the way that you see that visually is the things that are closer to you move faster than the things that are farther away from you. So you have to keep that in mind when you're doing an animation like this. But what I want to do is I want the van to kind of bounce up and down. I want the road to move really fast underneath it. And then I want the plants to kind of move a little bit fast, but not as fast as the road. And then I want the mountains to move. And those will move a lot slower than the things in the foreground. So what we'll do there is I started creating the animation. So the first thing I noticed was that there was only one of these roads, and when one left the page, I would need another to enter the page. So what I ended up doing is anything that had to exit the page and then enter the page around the same time, I needed to duplicate those sections of the SVG. So here you can see that I have road 1 and road 2, because as road 1 leaves the page, road 2 needs to enter the page at the same time. So that was a little tricky. But we'll get down to our keyframes. So if you're not familiar with keyframes, they're basically reusable animations, I guess, that you can use and then apply as the animation to an object. So here I created an animation or a keyframe called page exit. So anything that I want to exit the page, oh, that looks fun. I did a transform translate x 0, so that's where it will start. So it'll start where it is currently, and then translate x 100%. So it's going to move its x position 100% off the page. So as you can see, all of the items that have the page exit are exiting the page all the way, and then they're gone. So that's working. So the things that have that are clouds 2, mountains 2, terrain 2, and road 1. So it's just the duplicates of all of these items have this page exit on it, and then they're all at different speeds. So I just kind of played around with the speeds just so that the things that were in the foreground would go faster than the things that were in the background. The next one was the page enter keyframe. And that was kind of the opposite of the page exit one. So that's going to start 100% off the page and then come to the starting point. So at that point, they're missing each other completely. And it looks like it's a cyclic motion on the page. And now the van just kind of looks like it's sitting there and it doesn't match the terrain at all. So that's why I wanted to add a bounce to the van. So all that does is move everything besides the wheels, because the wheels should stay on the ground. It moves the van body up and down by 5 pixels the whole time. So that's all that went into this one. And then you can see all the different things, all the different parts of the SVG that have been animated here, and I'll save that. If anybody has any questions, I know I went through that a little fast. If anybody has any questions, feel free to drop that in chat. But otherwise, we will head on over to the GSAP demo. So here is that link. And this is what you saw on the first slide of my presentation. We're going to do a whole computer scene, basically. So this would be good for either like a loading scene or just something to drop onto your website at the very beginning to greet someone on your page, basically. So once again, I have the SVG. This is not very cleaned up whatsoever, just because I didn't need to, because it just came fine. I had to rename some things like the books, the computer, and that kind of stuff. For the starting point on the CSS, I didn't really have to do a ton. I faded most things out opacity wise, just so that it wasn't showing up on load, and just in case it was still in the viewport, I didn't want it to show up. And then other than that, I changed the fill color of the computer screen so it looked like it was off at the very beginning. Everything else I pushed outside of the viewport as much as possible. So I did a translate Y on that. So I shoved it out of the top of the viewport. So I did -200 VH to guarantee that it was out of the top of the viewport. So it should be double the viewport height in theory. Because I tried 100 VH, and then when you resize the viewport, it hated it. So we went with 200 just for kicks and giggles. So what I'm going to show you is GSAP. And I am by no means a GSAP expert. And I don't know if those people exist, because it is such an in-depth library. There's so many things that you can do. But the thing that I always focus on is the timeline. So the only time that I try to bring GSAP into my animations is when it's going to be just too in-depth for a CSS only animation. So in this case, I knew there were going to be a lot of moving components. There were going to be a lot of different things, and I needed to animate one thing after another. So instead of using CSS where I would have to calculate, okay, I need to wait now 10 seconds because these other animations were going to be 2, 2, 2, and 2. This way I can just make a timeline, and then it'll just automatically animate one thing after another, which is beautiful. It works marvelously. So I normally use it just for the timeline feature, but I would highly recommend that you go look up GSAP, because it has so many bells and whistles that I'm not even touching on today. But absolutely marvelous, so much fun. So I'm going to step through what I did for this animation using the GSAP timeline. So at this very beginning, what I'm doing is I'm initializing the timeline. So I'm defining it as TL. So that's just saying this is the GSAP timeline, and every time that I add something to this, it's just appending it onto this timeline. So then the first thing I do is I'm creating a label. So when you create a label, it's basically grouping sections of an animation together. So then when you add that label onto an animation later, those things will happen at the same time. By default, with a timeline, if you just add something with a like timeline.2, it will automatically just do the next thing. It'll add it onto the end. So if I create a label and then add it to an animation and then another animation, then those two things will happen simultaneously. So that's what I want to happen on this. And as you can see from my comment, this is possibly hacky. Yes. Does it work? Also, yes. And that's what we like to see. I tried a lot of ways of doing this. So what I'm trying to do here is I'm trying to get, I don't know if you remember from, this is what our ultimate animation is going to look like. So what I'm trying to do here is I'm trying to get these editor windows to be at the like right here and shrunk down. And when I did it just with CSS to initialize it, everything broke. So basically, GSAP doesn't like to work with pure CSS, and you have to kind of initialize things with GSAP itself in order to get it to work. So that's what I found, I guess. So what I'm doing here is I'm initializing those two windows. So I've got the editor window and the app window. Which one's which, we'll never know. And Y and X are just their coordinates according to where they are. So that's just the movement of the X and Y. It's basically the CSS version of translate X and translate Y. Duration is how fast it should go. I want it to go very fast because right now I believe they're still at an opacity of 0, so they're not being seen. But I just want this part to be over with as fast as possible. I'm scaling them down to nothing. And then I needed the transform origin to, I think it's bottom center is what it ended up being because nothing else was working. So when in doubt, just keep Googling various transform origin options until something works and then cry yourself to sleep. This was going very well, as you can see. But yeah, so I grouped these together to make this animation go as fast as possible. So at the very beginning, again, what we're doing here is grouping together the initial window movements, shrinking them down, and then moving them down to the bottom center of the screen so that later when we expand them back up, it looks like they're coming from the bottom center of the screen. Now we're going to turn on the computer. So we are targeting computer screen in the SVG. So we can look up here and look for computer screen. There it is. It's a nice little rectangle. And then we're going to just change its fill color. That's all we needed. The duration is 1 second. And then I wanted to delay 1 second just because at the very initial time, it was very jarring to have everything to start hitting run. I have it so that it doesn't start until you hit run. But then if you hit run and then all of a sudden the animation started, it was super jarring. So I went ahead and put a delay on there. That was just an optional little feature. So we can go ahead and click run from this point and it should just turn on the computer. Yay, our computer is on. So now we can slam all those books on your desk that you'll never read because one of them is Python. And if you've ever owned a Python book, you've never read it unless you're a crazy person. I own a Python book. I started reading it. I'm a crazy person. But it happens, you know? So what we're going to do right now, as you can see from the CSS, the top, middle, and bottom books, so all 3 books that go to the left of the computer, all of those were shoved way up to the top of the viewport, if you remember that. So now what we're going to be doing is slamming them down. So we just need to place them at their initial Y position because in the CSS, we moved them way up with their Y position. So all we're doing here is 1 by 1. I made it so that there was an ease none, so that it's a harsh fall, so that it goes with gravity. And then just 0.25 duration, so that it's just 1 by 1 slamming books on the table. So save that, run it, see what happens. Turns on, one by one, the books slam down. So far, so good. All right, and then next up is we had these pencils and a cup. So what I did for this was I slammed the cup down just like I did with the books. So I wanted gravity to work with that. So this is the exact same animation as the books. But then with the pencils, since they're a bit lighter, I wanted them to sort of bounce a little bit. And GSAP has this cool thing. I don't have it bookmarked because that would be too convenient. But they have this demo on CodePen that shows you the different types of eases that they allow, or that they've just already built out for you. And then they also have an option that where you can customize an ease option. But I just chose one of the ones that they had built out already, which was bounce out. So it does a normal ease, and then on the way out, it should bounce. So I added that to both of the pencils since they're lighter. And if you drop a pencil on a desk, it should bounce, right? So added that. And since they're light, it shouldn't take very long for them to fall. Ooh, quick bounces. And then last but not least, we have the editor windows. These were the trickiest, as mentioned earlier, when trying to initialize them. But at this point, we are not grouped anymore. We want them to come up one by one because you wouldn't open two editor windows at the same time. So I target editor window first because you start editing and then you abandon ship and go to an app window, I guess. And since we initialized it with an opacity of 0 at the very beginning because you don't want to watch all of this other stuff happening, so you want to make it invisible, you slowly shift it to an opacity of 1. So you slowly make it visible, and then we're going to move it X and Y positions to their initial state. We gave it a duration of 0.7 because that apparently felt right. And then we're going to move their scale X and scale Y to 1, so scale them back to the original position. And then I gave it the transform origin, the same one that was there before. So that's where it's going to scale in and out of, is that bottom center area. So once again, save, run. Computer turns on, slam the books, pencils, and then editor windows. And then that's all there is to it. It's not super crazy. It can get super crazy if you actually go down that rabbit hole. I can show you probably the most advanced one I've done so far, which took a lot of days, which is mostly because that was the first time that I ever used GSAP, but it's also my most popular one. So if you're familiar with Lilo and Stitch, you will recognize this man who drops his ice cream cone every time he is shown in the movie or on the TV show. And it's just this ongoing cyclic animation. And I'm so glad that someone just drove by while I have a mostly naked man on my screen. This happens at work a lot too, where I'll have this guy up. People are like, why do you have this man? I'm like, but he's a TV character. You don't get it? So I think you promised that he's from Lilo and Stitch, and I don't just do this for fun. But he is my most famous one on CodePen. And this, I guess the timeline isn't too crazy, but it was hard to get the ice cream to do that, and it was stressful. But yeah, so there's the different options. I do see a question: what do you typically use to make your own SVGs? Yeah, so I usually use Illustrator, just because that's what I have. I have Adobe Creative Cloud, and Illustrator was made for vector images. So usually I will make my own through that. So just like this charming fellow that you just saw here, I took the original image or just some image of that character off of Google Images or something, and then I traced him using the pen tool. colored them in, all that kind of stuff. So especially if it's a cartoon of some sort, it's fairly easy to trace over something if you're used to that. And then you just have to section off the different parts that you want to animate. So like his arm was moving, so I had to section that off. His head moved, so I had to section that off. So you just have to make sure that every part is cohesive, so that if you do move the arm, then you don't just have like this missing chunk of his body or something, because I've run into that issue too. So you just have to be aware of all of the different parts that may be seen when you animate the different sections. I do run them through SVG OMG occasionally, but at this point, I am my own SVG OMG just because I've been around the SVG so much. So I know what I can and can't remove. Usually SVG OMG is trying to take out, like, let's see. Usually they'll take out like this kind of stuff, and I was lazy and I didn't. So they'll ask if you want it to be, if you want to be able to resize it. So it'll ask about this view box section here. They might pluck out your CSS or something, which I did that manually. So originally the CSS was all in a style tag, like right here. So it was like style, blah, blah, blah. And all these classes had varying styles. So what I did is I plucked them out manually and then shoved them all down here and just got them out of the way, just because I wanted it to look a little bit cleaner. But yeah, that's just stuff that I do manually. So there's a pen tool within Illustrator. I usually just use my mouse for it because it's easier for me. I've just gotten used to it, but I do have a Wacom tablet. I don't remember which kind. It's not even the kind that you can see the drawing on it. So that is the brand, and that is very general because they have a million tablets. But the kind that I have is just, it has dots on it and buttons on the top. So it maps to your screen. And it comes with a pen, then you can map the pen buttons to different functions within your computer. Works like a charm. I mostly use that for stuff like Photoshop or whatever, if I have to do more advanced drawing. But when it comes to the vectors and stuff, I'm usually just using my mouse because, I mean, I have to click and drag a bunch of anchor points and stuff. So someone who's really good with that is, oh geez, what's her name? She's a lettering artist. Oh gosh, it's not going to come to me. Nope, it's not going to happen. But basically, I learned this method from this lady somewhere, where she would, if she was tracing over something, she would just drop a bunch of anchor points using the pen tool in Illustrator, and then she would go back and then make it actually match what she was trying to do. So the initial version of all of the tracings that I do look hideous, and that's my favorite part of the process because you have like this very abstract looking object that is supposed to be clearly supposed to be something, and then I usually take pictures of it and I send it to my friends. I'm like, look, a fish or something, because I was trying to make a fish at one point and it was just this really janky looking thing, and they were like, oh, are you okay? Because they've seen the stuff that I can do and it's usually halfway decent, I think. And but this thing, it needed to be taken somewhere. It needed to be taken back to the pet shop. But yeah, so I usually go over, do a once over with just the anchor points, and then go back through and then actually drag them out and make the rounded edges and stuff like that, or add and remove anchor points as needed. So that's kind of the best system that I've found so far. Works pretty well. So here are some places where you can get more information. Clearly, I'm really good at choosing a font size. So this first link was where I got a lot of the rules of animation. They kind of go into some more depth on when you should or shouldn't use animation on your website. the exact speed of an animation. I think they said 10 seconds was the absolute max that an animation should be. After that, people start losing interest. I thought that was interesting because I didn't know that. I just kind of feel it out. So that's not really good advice to give someone because someone else feeling it out may be different than me feeling it out. So the next one is a list of JavaScript animation libraries. Pretty much the only one that I've used is GreenSock. So I've been meaning to get into Three.js, and then I look at it and then I don't want to anymore because there's just so much documentation. I don't even know where to start. So um, my advice is to go onto CodePen and see where someone else has done something that you think is cool, fork it, and then just kind of play around with it. That's kind of how I got started. That's how I learned a lot of this stuff, was just like, oh, I think that's cool, and then I forked it, and then I just started messing around with it until I broke it so badly that I needed to try to put it back together. Which I guess is what you can say about any engineer. I guess is that's how you got started. And then here's Cassie's Twitter. She's just really neat to watch do anything. So I follow her on Twitter, and that's usually how I know that something new has come out for GSAP or any other animation libraries, usually through Cassie. So would give her a follow on the Twitters. So now, if anybody has any other questions, feel free to ask. And then there's my social media, and then everyone should head up innocentlightsfoundation.org to learn more information about that. Thank you all for coming.